Hey, thank you so much for being here. As you know, in the House and in the Senate, we're approaching our deadline tomorrow afternoon. And so for the last couple of weeks, that's what we've been focused on. I know there's a lot of issues that are trading back and forth between the House and the Senate right now. And but our main focus is let's get the bills out of House of Origin. And we'll have that. I fully expect we'll be here late tonight. Once we get through that, Thursday we'll kick in on things like transportation, operating budget, all those types of things, again, that are the bigger picture items. And the other thing too is once we get through our cutoffs, it'll give us a better idea as well as to what types of bills are going to have to be considered in the operating budget. I know in the House, my understanding is that we're hearing the end of March is when they're trying to get it out. I think that March 23rd deadline is really what we would like to see, if we can get that budget out there for the public on the 23rd. We'll be talking to the Democrats more and more about that. But my hope is that we'll see that. It'll also be interesting to see if they've included things like cap and trade and your income tax or your capital gains income tax bill, if that's part of their budget strategies or not. You know, we've got a lot of work to do. We're excited about that part of it, but again, our focus is getting through tomorrow's cutoff. Senator Schessler.
Thank you, Leader Christensen. You know, I think the Senate is running pretty smoothly. 2 years ago, we passed more bills than average without any real problems. Wasn't our goal. Our goal wasn't this year to set a new record, but as of last night, we'd passed more bills through the Senate than we did 2 years ago, which was never our goal. We'll pass more today and more tomorrow, but the point is, we're functioning well, getting a lot of things done. It's important to know that the glass is half full. We still have good economic news. We're moving ahead. Transportation has moved out ahead of cutoff. So we're functioning well. I think the important thing is we're working on a lot of very positive energy and environmental legislation. The leaders on that, Senators Brown and Erickson, are here today. They did yeoman's work. I think last night was really groundbreaking energy policy that all the ratepayers in the state win, and the environment.
Questions?
Senator Erickson, are you confident that the coal-by-wire bill will come up before Wednesday's cutoff?
No, not now. We just got the most recent draft that was produced over the weekend with the governor's office working with utilities, and so we're going through it right now, and I think the issue still remains. Time certainty issues, making sure we have a reliable baseload replacement energy available to move forward, and also dealing with protecting the ratepayers in Washington State. Now, I've always addressed this issue as if we're forced to shut down a coal-fired facility by the federal government, how do I protect the ratepayers in Washington State? And we're going to continue looking at that very closely and trying to get to a solution on it, but not guaranteeing anything by Wednesday. It's a lot of moving pieces, and we can't forget about the thousands and thousands of jobs in Montana and the families that would be impacted by a decision here. And I think we owe it to them to have conversations with the elected leaders and the people of Montana while we move forward on this.
Is this one of those bills that, is there anything in it that if you get past cutoff, it could be resurrected between the cutoff and the end of session?
Yeah, that's above my pay grade. That's the two guys in the middle, you decide that, right? But I think any bill we can, this is what I would call it could potentially be NTGH, necessary to go home. So I think it rises to that level, but again, we have to get it right, and we do have time. So we have to get it right, and there is pressure to move this year, but this is the type of thing that we could continue working on in the interim to get it right next year also.
Senator Erickson, I saw that the amendment and some hazmat rail workers was tacked on successfully to your oil train safety bill. I was curious to get your sense. Did that go through because there's a growing concern with more train derailments, or
I think that's a piece of legislation that's been in the legislature for several years now. It's more of a relationship issue between the railroads and their labor force. My concern about that particular amendment is it went far beyond crude by rail and talked about hazardous materials, so now you get into fertilizers for the agricultural community, and I believe technically a quart plastic container of a Castrol 30-weight oil would qualify as hazardous material also, so I don't think there'd be any train basically traveling that doesn't carry hazardous materials. So concerned about the definitions, I think that should have been a standalone bill, and it was introduced as a standalone bill, and it was tacked onto this one at the end. So it doesn't stop the bill from going forward because the oil by rail legislation is so important. We're continuing working on that.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. Spring is here, people are farming again. We've transported anhydrous ammonia since 1952 without an accident in this state. And that'll be moving on our short lines in southeast, north central, eastern Washington, along with dry fertilizers and other key products. And the short lines are a completely different creature than the main lines. So, you know, there's some collateral damage out there that we need to consider in this, along with the general public safety.
What are the biggest bills that you're planning on bringing to the floor both this afternoon and tomorrow, essentially? Trying to get a handle on
I think
what are the big counts you're going to be.
anything is still in the realm of possible. People are counting votes. I think we're likely to go back to rules. So I think almost anything is in the possibles.
Democrats say the low carbon fuel standard provision is unacceptable. They're calling it a poison pill even. Will that prevent it from getting through the House, do you think? And if so, why is that something that is so important to include it?
In the Senate, we call it consumer protection. I'm not sure what the House wants to do with it.
You know, very clearly when you're talking transportation, we know that low carbon fuel standards are going to, you know, also increase the cost of gasoline on top of any transportation package and really candidly not enhance bridges that need to be fixed, you know, roads that need to be repaired and so forth. So I think what they did was wise on their part because what we've heard in our districts all across the state is, you know, this is a tax on a tax and wow, and we don't get anything for that. So I'm frankly glad they did what they did.
Other questions?
You both pass any pressure to take up the $12 an hour minimum wage, given the threat of initiative? People like Nick Hanna were tweeting $16 in 2016 if you don't do it.
Well, if we governed on the threat of every initiative threat, we wouldn't do much around here. We wouldn't think very well. We're certainly looking at ways to increase jobs and where some middle ground could possibly be. But when you write the bill in the title, your options are more limited than they would be for some give and take in the process.
What do you mean by that? What would you like to see?
Well, I think there's a lot of ideas. I mean, teen unemployment is super high, and there's a lot of interest in doing something about teens with summer or training, because teen unemployment, I think, is unacceptable at this level. When you write the bill in the title, it's really difficult to do that for a problem that I think we'd all like to solve. We also have to remember, we have border counties in this state. When you have Idaho across the line at 7 something an hour, it's a huge gap for those people to compete with. And sometimes our friends in central Puget Sound forget about border counties, whether with Idaho or Oregon.
Would you accept a compromise that had some sort of training wage or teen wage and it along with the $12?
Well, you know, Jim, I think there's a lot of interest in that. The problem is the bill was written in the title, and the tyranny in the House refused to accept really any amendments on scope and object.
Yeah, they really have limited our ability to work with them or compromise. I'm sure you watched the debate, and we watched just amendment after amendment after amendment being scoped. So what's our ability to work with them when they did that? I personally believe, from talking to members in the Democratic Party, that the tight title was not to prevent us from adopting amendments, but to prevent their own members from voting for them. We had probably 51, 52 votes, bipartisan votes for those amendments, but by drafting that title so narrowly, it was to prevent the Democrats from compromising with us. And now we send over this bill, and there's not a lot of flexibility. As for Mr. Hanover, I'd say that, maybe $16 works for a billionaire in downtown Seattle, but it may not work for a young entrepreneur in the rest of the state. And when we craft minimum wage laws, we should craft minimum wage laws that work for the whole state, not a 5 square mile part of the state.
Senator Diemeier has a bill. I know there are a few others to tweak some of the transfer exemption language on I-594. Are those going to get votes in the Senate?
People are counting votes right now to see if some very common sense reforms could be brought up in the next 24 hours.
You both passed a WSU medical school bill in the last, 18 hours. Which vehicle is gonna be the final one?
Well, President Reagan said it's amazing what can get done if you don't worry about who gets credit for it. And we're going to follow Reagan's advice.
So who's not gonna get credit?
Well, John, when we were looking at the Boeing deal, sponsorship, we had a coin toss in the governor's office. I don't know, I think two fine legislators are working on an issue that is clearly very popular on both sides of the aisle in both rotundas.
Hey, and I'm not the leader over here, so I'm going to acquiesce to the leader in the Senate. But I think it's an important piece of legislation. I think, and it was articulated very well, the need for, the expansion of this program on a statewide level. I don't know if you've taken a look at the statistics on the underserved counties we have, predominantly not just in eastern Washington, but all over rural Washington, and even a lot of the suburban counties in Washington state are way underserved, and the capacity that the University of Washington has just is not ever going to meet those needs the way they're going right now. I think that this is something that is a viable option. I think that we've got another university that has the capacity to do this. We're talking about locating this in the second largest state second largest city in the state, being on the other end of the state. The other thing too is the competitive aspect that border city has with Idaho. There's a lot of things that they are going to be able to take into consideration that I don't think that University of Washington has had to take into consideration, because it's not a border city, unless you want to call it with Japan, that they've really had to be concerned with. And I think that is something that will, I think, work out very well for the counties we have all over eastern Washington and other parts of the state as well.
What are you
Yes.
guys thinking about the governor's proposed increase in cigarette taxes? Is that something that either caucus thinks you might be able to support?
We haven't talked much about it.
It's interesting that one of the things that we're working on in finance is making sure that the taxes on medical marijuana and recreational marijuana aren't so high that we create an incentive for the black market to stay in existence, right? And so we've spent the last year trying to work on a bill that says, we need to find that sweet spot where we get some revenue for schools, but we don't have the tax so high that we basically make the black market and the illegal market a reasonable choice for people. We should be thinking about the same thing with cigarettes. Every time we raise the cigarette tax, the data from DOR shows that more people do black market cigarettes, that they go to tribal areas to buy cigarettes, they go across the state to buy cigarettes. So we have to make sure that we find a point where you increase the tax and you actually get less revenue. And that not only can happen, it has happened, and DOR's got the data to prove it. And and I'll get it for you, so it's not just my word. Oh, you already have it, okay.
For those of us that live in these border communities, we actually see this happening in our community. So to tandem on to what Representative Manweller is saying, we need to find that sweet spot, that balance.
Got a few more minutes. Anybody else? Strike one, two.
Jim, you're thinking real hard back there.
I'll throw it out, I guess. Senator Erickson, what do you make of your energy bills chances in the House, and is there any chance that they'll be talking turkey with you and in exchange for something that you might be able to come their way on some environmental bills, or is it just two ships passing in the night?
No, I sure hope so. No, I think the Senate right now, we're the only legislative chamber actually to pass out legislation that would lead to less carbon being produced in Washington state. So I think it's the vehicle right now. And I'd like to also highlight in the oil by rail, for example, we accepted numerous proposals from the Democrats about pre-notification, tax increases on oil trains, tax increases on railroads, increased inspectors going on private property. So a lot of the things we've already included, so we'll continue working in that fashion to continue taking the good ideas and mix them together. But I think this is an idea that has broad support. I think in the House you're going to see a coalition come together of urban Democrats and rural Republicans, where you have the PUDs and the IOUs saying this is a great idea. You have the people in the inner city saying this is a great idea to use these dollars not to buy wrecks in Idaho, but to do weatherization on low-income houses in White Center. I think you're going to see that really coming together and the pressure building. And what's interesting is sometimes we are ahead of our time, and California is now actually starting to look at this idea down there to transfer some of their renewable portfolio standards into carbon reduction plans and clean energy investment funds. So I think we're leading, they're seeing what we're doing. So I think there's a great opportunity. And whether it's part of a bigger deal that involves a solar energy package and involves some coal strip legislation, we're working very hard to see that happen. All good things coming together. It's not necessarily a trade, but I think a package of good ideas that can come together at the same time and move forward together.
And nuclear plays within that mix as well. I mean, nuclear is zero carbon emissions. It's certainly something that this governor supports, the former governor supports, all but one of our congressional delegations supports. So we are in energy looking for ways where we can come together and move the state forward.
The other thing too is that with respect to the fact that you had asked the question is which vehicle is going to be used, on this issue. I think what you're going to see this year more than we've seen in past years is not necessarily all the companion bills from passing both sides. There's a lot of legislation that's being already worked from all four corners of the building and the governor's office, such as this. And so I think that there are going to be many, many bills you're going to see where the companion does not pass, because it's been decided that, look, we've got so close to a tie, legislatively speaking, down here, and since all four corners are already working together on many of these issues, that there's going to be a lot of bills as we get to tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening where you're going to go, why didn't the House version of the same bill pass? Well, it's because the priority is not necessarily on whose name is on the bill or which chamber the bill came from, but the fact that you've already got a lot of folks working together behind the scenes to come to some kind of consensus on this. And I think that this will be one of those sessions, hopefully, where you're going to see more bipartisan support on these more controversial issues, because everybody has been at the table talking about it since early on in session.
And just to follow up, we're still holding committee time to hear the House cap and trade bill.
Waiting on that.
Waiting on it, so as soon as it comes over, locked out quite a bit of time for that public hearing.
Did you have anything else?
Just really quickly, I know the governor's cap and trade bill has a hearing, I think, in appropriations, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, kudos to these two for their bills. These were discussed items in the climate change work group that we served on with the governor. And so I'm excited to see some of our ideas coming forward in a way that create incentives to reduce carbon instead of some of the other proposals that were out there. So I'm really excited to hopefully get to see those bills in the House.
Anybody else? That's it. Thank you very much.